Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to those here in Tel Aviv. Good morning, evening, good night for those around the world who are joining us online. We were supposed to hold this conference on December 8th, 2023, but on October 7 and after October 7, we decided to postpone to May, not knowing though that the war will still be going on 230 days later, with 128 hostages still remaining in captivity. And yes, and we will state it here again, we want to bring them home, and now. Having said that, we decided to move on and go ahead with this conference because we thought that we still need to address China's rise and present the Global Israel Initiative. For that purpose, and to introduce the Signal Group's Global Israel Initiative, I would like to invite our leader, our founder and executive director, Carice Witte. The floor is yours.
You can hear me. Yes, you can. So I am very delighted that you are all here, and I want to thank you for coming. Thank you to those of you who have joined us from around the world. I know we have people tuned in from China to the United States and everything in between. I'm grateful for the opportunity to introduce the Global Israel Initiative and share some of the thinking behind it, because it's our first strategic expansion since launching Signal Group in 2011. The Global Israel Initiative, the GII, evolved out of our understanding of China's rise on the world stage. The trajectory of that rise led to Israel's new imperative regarding China, a great power that is here to stay, one that will continue to influence global affairs, including in Israel and the region, in ways that suit China. In some cases, that's going to be good for Israel. In others, China's positions and policies will not favor Israel's national interests, as we have seen increasingly over the past few years, and quite strikingly since October 7. Israel's new imperative regarding China is to manage the pros and cons to its best possible benefit. The GII, the Global Israel Initiative, understands that this is no longer a game of chess, where, as in the Cold War, the pieces were moved to destroy the enemy or take the king. We now have a game of Wei Qi, or Go, one of strategic encirclement, where the pieces are moved in a fashion that will change the calculus at any given time. In Wei Qi and in strategic encirclement, we have new tools of trade. We have a battlefield that is complex and multifaceted. And the new tools of trade include things such as fighting for control of core minerals, or battling for the production of green technologies or the technologies of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, or creating asymmetries and dependencies, or trying to mitigate or end them. The GII takes all these into consideration, as it does the power of perception. In that power of perception, we're looking at narrative warfare, as is being played out right now on TikTok and X, and in traditional media, where AI-generated deepfakes make it impossible to discern fact from fiction. The GII also recognizes the redistribution of power and the shift in power, where the US is no longer the heavyweight champion it once was. Yes, it is still the major power, but the challenging power is growing in impact and popularity. In this new landscape, what does it mean for the rest of us? Small and middle powers that comprise the rest of the world. What does it mean for Israel? On the one hand, the great powers are upping their game. On the other, they really can't go it alone, and we can take, for example, how China puts so much effort into expanding BRICS and bringing in Gulf countries, or how it claims to lead the global south because it needs those numbers. We can also look at the United States and how it is moving from a hub and spokes approach to a lattice strategy where small and middle powers are not only collaborating and cooperating with the US, but also with each other, as we see in the trilateral of Japan, South Korea, and US, which was a surprise to China, and also in the quadrilateral, the Australia, Japan, US, and India cooperation. All of this speaks to the growing role of middle powers. So as we think about this, we want to look at what's Israel's role. Traditionally, Israel's national security and foreign affairs establishment see Israel as solely a regional power, a Middle East regional power. We say, however, that the shifting global strategic landscape and China's rise lead to a new imperative and compel Israel to look beyond the Middle East, to look beyond the region to the global arena. And from our perspective, this is encompassed by the Global Israel Initiative, to look eastward to the Indo-Pacific and focus on Israel as a middle power. Indo-Pacific, middle power, two terms that are critical to our strategy that do not have Hebrew versions. We have coined Matzamat Tavech for middle power, so remember that. Let's look at the middle power aspect of the Global Israel Initiative. Israel is already a middle power, and we have been for some time. We punch above our weight in many of the technologies of the fourth industrial revolution. We're talking about cyber, nano, chip design, quantum, and the very well-known fields of military and defense technology. And that doesn't even mention our global contribution for decades in water and agricultural technology. The fact that Indo-Pacific countries are increasingly interested in Israel's areas of expertise only speak to our growing role as a middle power. And we see how the middle power strategy has done very well for certain Middle East countries. Qatar, UAE, they punch above their weight and expand their influence and stature worldwide. So let's look at the Indo-Pacific aspect of this GII. The Indo-Pacific is not a term you hear very often in Israel, but in the rest of the world, it's quite common. US, Europe, and of course across Asia. The term emerged in 2013 and was strongly supported by Japan's late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, and it caught on. It generally refers to the Indian and Pacific Oceans and is essentially a geostrategic term that is referring to the countries of Asia and the Pacific Rim and their experience with a rising China and the related benefits and challenges. The GII brings these two concepts together, middle power and Indo-Pacific. How can Israel, as a middle power on the world stage, contribute more to international collaborations, but instead of putting so much energy into the West, or focusing so much on the West, to expand its resources invested in cultivating ties with Japan, with India, South Korea, Vietnam, in small groupings of countries that are interest-based with added value, bringing in Europe and Middle East countries where they can contribute and benefit. The GII, which was designed in order to strengthen Israel in the face of a rising China, was in fact inspired by China and the suite of initiatives that President Xi Jinping has said are fashioned to reshape global governance. The Global Development Initiative, GDI, Global Civilization Initiative, GCI, and the Global Security Initiative, GSI. Notably, when the GSI was first made public, China's top diplomat, Wang Yi, announced that China's GSI should become the new security architecture for the Middle East. So it was no surprise that the GSI was embedded in the Saudi-Iran agreement brokered by China. So China has the GDI, GCI, GSI. We have the GII. Why do we expect the GII to be an effective strategy for Israel vis-à-vis China? China responds to success. It recognizes and respects the diplomatic stature of a country based in part on its partnerships with other countries. The GII aims to expand the scope and reach of Israel's global ties and thereby enhance our international influence and bolster our strategic posture and resilience. Like China, Israel prioritizes national security. I think we can all agree to that. So Beijing must understand that Israel can't ignore the geostrategic changes taking place in our region and on the global stage. When considering how to address these evolving circumstances, we can do so in ways that foster new opportunities, GII, and also to mitigate a range of risks, GII. And once we have cultivated and expanded these ties, we can look to a strategy that offers credible benefits to Israel's national security writ large and contributes to maintaining our qualitative edge. These are the goals of the GII. Thank you. Okay, and now it is my great privilege to introduce our keynote speaker, who I believe will be joining us on screen from Washington. I'm introducing Mark Lambert, China Coordinator and Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for China and Taiwan of the U.S. State Department. Mr. Lambert has extensive experience in China, cross-strait, and Asia-Pacific affairs. He most recently served as Deputy Assistant Secretary with responsibility for Japan, Korea, Mongolia, Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands. While political counselor in Hanoi, he helped devise a South China Sea maritime strategy. He served twice in Beijing, most recently managing U.S. political military affairs with China. He's a recipient of numerous awards for his work in addressing crises in Asia, such as the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami and the 2011 Fukushima nuclear disaster. We're so pleased to have you with us today. Deputy Assistant Secretary Lambert, the floor is yours. Just a moment. We aren't hearing you. Just one moment, please. Maybe, shall we try again? No? Are we having trouble with the sound link? Sound link experts, please step in. And? Apologies. Technical difficulties. I probably shouldn't say anything, but sometimes we suffer from power outages in Israel, so hopefully this will be the worst that happens. And how are we doing? You can only imagine the scheduling challenges to make this work because Mr. Lambert's schedule is extremely difficult, and we had this much of a window, and we made everything come together, and he made all the effort and the the embassy, the U.S. Embassy, has made a huge contribution to making this all happen. And we're going to need to use sign language, it turns out. Can I get a code, a high sign? Hope from the Peanut Gallery. Any? Okay, how can I keep you all entertained for the next minute and a half while they figure it out? I could take questions from the audience. Any questions about the GII while I'm standing here? Yeah. Stand up so I can hear you, and I'll repeat your question. The names and speakers. There's a program online. Yes. Okay. No extraneous questions, please. Anything about the Global Israel Initiative? Was it super clear? Now everybody knows what it is, and we have you all on board joining us. Yes, please.
Thank you for sharing. My question would be, do you have any plans this year that host you?
Yeah, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Ah,
Is that Mark?
that is Mark. Can you hear me? Thank you so much for your patience. Well, that was exciting. Good afternoon to all of you. I'm speaking to you today from the State Department in Washington. I'm terribly sorry that I cannot be with you all there in person, but I'm glad to have this opportunity to join you virtually. Thank you to Signal and to you, Carice, for inviting me to speak with you all here today. Before I get into my remarks, let me start by saying that Hamas's shocking attack on October 7th was devastating, and I know that the Israeli people are still living with the consequences of that horrible day. Israel faced its darkest moments on October 7th, and throughout, the United States has stood with Israel. President Biden has reaffirmed time and time again my country's ironclad commitment to the security of your country. The United States is also doing everything we can to end the terrible suffering of the people in Gaza, to bring home all of the hostages, and to prevent the conflict from spreading. I know this is not the topic of today's discussion, but it's important for me to acknowledge that context. Turning back to today's conference, I'd like to congratulate Signal on its Global Israel Initiative, which, as Carice mentioned, was launched earlier this year. I commend your goal of broadening and deepening Israel's ties across the Indo-Pacific. This is a goal that we share with you. The PRC presents the most significant long-term challenge to the international order because it is the only competitor with both the intent to reshape the international order and increasingly the economic, the diplomatic, the military, and the technological power to do it. The United States has continued to deliver on our invest, align, and compete approach to U.S. PRC relations. In our invest pillar, we've made historic investments in the sources of American strength at home, including through the bipartisan infrastructure law, the CHIPS and Science Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act. Align means cooperating with our partners, as was mentioned before, that lattice work of relations that we have that include trilateral cooperation with Japan and Korea, the Quad with India, Japan, and Australia, AUKUS with the UK and Australia, trilaterals with Japan, the Philippines, and the United States, and increasingly a greater connection between Europe and our friends in East Asia. But this also means we want to coordinate more closely with our partners in Israel to advance our goals of preserving the rules-based international order from which we all, including the PRC, have benefited. President Biden has placed tremendous focus on deepening our alliances and our partnerships around the world, especially in the Indo-Pacific. But we are also competing. And intense competition requires intense diplomacy. We are committed to responsibly managing this incredibly important relationship and ensuring that competition does not inadvertently veer into conflict. In that spirit, we are seeking to maintain open lines of communication with Beijing, even as we continue taking competitive steps to defend our interests and our values, always in close coordination with our allies and our partners. While there are many areas where the United States and the PRC disagree, there is no substitute for face-to-face diplomacy and maintaining those channels of communication and responsibly managing our competition. As you all know, Secretary Blinken concluded a 3-day visit to Shanghai and Beijing, April 24th to 26th, to follow up on the agenda set by President Biden and President Xi Jinping in San Francisco last November. Our 3 objectives for that trip were, number 1, to responsibly manage our competition and to strengthen our lines of communication. Second, to make progress on areas of cooperation. And third, to manage our bilateral, regional, and global differences. We saw progress in 3 areas where our leaders made commitments in San Francisco. First, in advancing counter-narcotics cooperation to disrupt the global flow of synthetic drugs into the United States. Second, to enhance military-to-military communication to avoid miscalculation and conflict. And third, we launched talks on managing the artificial intelligence risk and safety challenges. The Secretary and his Chinese interlocutors also discussed Russia's war against Ukraine. China is by far the largest supplier of dual-use goods to Russia. It now accounts for more than 73% of Russian imports since the invasion. Secretary Blinken underscored the importance of this issue to not only Ukraine, but to transatlantic security. Transatlantic security, of course, is a core U.S. interest. Secretary Blinken told the Chinese that Beijing cannot claim to be a neutral actor in this conflict, while it is supporting the greatest threat to European security since the end of the Cold War. He made clear that if China supports Russia's defense industrial base does not stop, the United States will take action. Secondly, we had deep conversations about our economic differences. China remains America's 3rd largest trading partner. We did over $700 billion worth of trade with China last year. Yet we have concerns in 3 basic areas on economic cooperation. First is China's overcapacity. You've seen steps we've taken to express our deep concern about China's overcapacity in electric vehicles, in electric vehicle batteries, and some renewable technologies. Second is what National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has described as our deep concerns about certain technologies. The so-called small garden high fence problems. We have deep concerns about certain technologies that can be weaponized. And in short, we're not going to aid the Chinese in getting technologies that can be weaponized to kill Americans or our friends and allies. And third, we have deep concerns about human rights steps. You've seen we've taken steps to ban the importation of goods into the United States that are made in Xinjiang without a full guarantee that those goods are not made with forced labor. The PRC represents a global challenge, but nowhere is that challenge more acute than in the Indo-Pacific. In the Pacific, we see the challenge Beijing poses manifest through Chinese law enforcement and security presence in several countries. China's blatant bribery to flip Taiwan's diplomatic partners and heavily branded, non-transparent, and debt-laden infrastructure projects. Although China presents a national security challenge which will set the stage for the future, our vision for the region transcends geopolitics. Our Indo-Pacific strategy envisions an Indo-Pacific that is free and open, connected, prosperous, secure, and resilient. Our strategy recognizes that today's challenges, such as climate change and economic resilience, are too big for any single country to tackle on its own. And to further connect the Indo-Pacific to the rest of the world, the United States is committed to working together with our Indo-Pacific and our European partners to establish the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, or IMEC. The IMEC is expected to stimulate economic development through enhanced connectivity and economic integration between Asia, the Arabian Gulf, and Europe. Israel is central, literally and figuratively, to this bold vision. We are continuing to strengthen our support for the regional priorities aligned with the Pacific Islands Forum 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent. We are expanding our diplomatic presence and development assistance in that region with new embassies, an increased U.S. Agency for International Development presence, and the return of the Peace Corps volunteers to a number of countries in the Pacific. The recent passage of over $7 billion in funding for our Pacific Islands partners demonstrates our commitment to close partners in the region. Because the threats to the international system Beijing poses are not confined to the Indo-Pacific or to any other single region, it is imperative that we knit together our partnerships and our coalitions across issues and across continents to strengthen our collective engagement with those who share our vision. This includes emerging partners across the globe who are invested in partnering with us on an issue-by-issue basis in defense of these principles, who recognize the need to deepen, to broaden, and connect our partnerships across the world, establishing and supporting both new and existing networks to build collective capacity and to address global challenges. That is how we will continue to address global challenges to the international order in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, and I wish you continued success in your endeavors. Thank you.
I would like to thank Deputy Assistant Secretary Lambert and invite the first session to join me on stage. Clarice, Professor Suzuki, and General Abu Rukun, please. Join.
I just want to apologize to the woman who asked the question. I'm sorry for cutting you off. All of the technical issues, but I would be very happy to briefly give you a quick reply. Could you just state your question again? Topics for the public? So we have plans. We don't have anything that we can share yet, but I will tell you that we're working assiduously in order to advance those plans, put them down, etch them into the annual plan, and you will all hear about every opportunity to come together, and we look forward to working with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I just heard my marching orders. Ladies and gentlemen, we are very privileged to have this stellar session with us. I understand we have two individuals also connecting to us from abroad, but let me first introduce those on the stage. To my far left, Professor Suzuki from the University of Tokyo, and I think he deserves a special thanks for him being the only international participant to arrive to Israel for the conference. It's a bit sad that we have to point that out, but that is the current situation. To my center, we have, of course, Clarice Witte, the founder and executive director of Signal Group, and to my closest left, Brigadier General retired, Dr. Abu Rukun, who served as the military secretary to the President of the State of Israel and as IDF attaché, as the military attaché to China. Joining us from abroad, I can see him easily on the right end of your screen is an old friend of Signal Group, Ambassador Bilahari Kausikan. He's joining us actually not so far away. He's right now in Doha, if I'm not mistaken. He will confirm that, yes. Ambassador Kausikan is the chairman of the Middle East Institute at the National University of Singapore. He's a former permanent secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Singapore and a veteran diplomat, well-known thought leader on international politics of Asia. To his left is Mr. Jude Blanchard, who is the Freeman Chair at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in DC. He's a well-known author and writer on China, but actually we invited him to join us on this session because he actually wrote, and we'll turn to him first, a recent article on the role of middle powers, because one of the issues we tackle on occasion when we have to explain this whole concept of middle powers and why Israel is, all right, do they really matter? And for those, and I'll turn straight away to Mr. Blanchard, because I think he makes that case very clearly, very persuasively. Well, I admit I'm a bit, I have a tendency to that point, but Mr. Blanchard, please.
Well, thank you.
Do they matter?
Yes. So those are the entirety of my remarks. Just kidding. No, first of all, I just want to thank you for the invitation. I will say I feel a little bit shamed now that it's been called out that only one international participant. I will say I tried my hardest to be able to come, and in our defense, we also have a newborn baby in the house. So there were a constellation of factors here that got in the way. But we'll say that the question you're asking to me becomes only more clear in the important answer of yes. If we think about the strategic environment we face right now, and I'm speaking now as an American, of course, it is even more clear the role that different countries with different capabilities play. And I'm uncomfortable with the word middle power. I think it assigns a hierarchical status that is a bit outdated. I have a hard time thinking of Israel as a, quote, middle power. Instead, I think we need to think about the various types of capabilities, the various types of niche powers that individual countries bring to the table. The piece which you reference, and I appreciate the support and the shout out for the piece, was really speaking to an audience in the United States, which to some extent I feel is living in the 1990s. It sees the United States to some extent still in a unipolar moment where we can dictate to even partners and allies the behavior we need to see in order to achieve our grand strategic outcomes. And the reality is that is no longer the case. Bilahari will say this with far more eloquence than I have, but the world's Pacific is no longer just a hub and spokes where the United States is the only one calling the shots. Part of this is because we're no longer in just a military competition. If we think about the importance of economics, technology, global supply chains, we see that there are small niche powers which play disproportionate roles. The Netherlands needs its own chapter in great power competition because it has the presence of one company, ASML, which, along with Taiwan's TSMC, is existential for all of our economies. And you saw in the case of the United States pushing some technology controls on China about 2 years ago. We needed to work hard to get the Japanese and the Dutch on board because the United States is not in a position where it can unilaterally impose technology controls that have any efficacy unless we're bringing other countries in. And again, the Netherlands isn't considered in classic definition a sort of a great power, but when it comes to technological supply chains, it is. So I will end my comments here by just saying in the affirmative, and this why this discussion today is so critical. It is 2014, not 1995.
Yeah, actually it's 2024, but yeah, don't worry, I made that mistake. It's the baby, to which we can only say we usually say Mazal Tov, irregardless. Ambassador Kelsey Khan.
Tommy.
Could we really make a difference? Would we be able to influence how China views Israel if we would up our game in the Indo-Pacific?
First of all, thank you for inviting me to participate, and I'm very sorry I can't be in two places at the same time. I'd much rather be in Israel, to tell you the truth. But let me say that much of what I wanted to say, Jude has already said. But to answer your question, I mean to give a context to your question, I understand what you're asking. I think we have to understand that the world is now multipolar, and multipolarity has many dimensions, right? It is absurd to think of Singapore, for example, as any kind of pole in the traditional sense. But in certain specific domains, we do have a role. For example, in some kinds of finance, in logistics, and so on. And I think Israel has to think of itself in the same way. And I think your initiative, a Signals initiative, is pointing in the same direction. So the answer, Tommy, to your question is you can play a role, and that role in the Indo-Pacific, you have to define that role very carefully and realistically. And China will also have to rethink how it looks at Israel if you start to play that role. China, the biggest influence on China is China itself. All right? And China will have to rethink its role in the Middle East if Israel rethinks its role in the Indo-Pacific. I think the recent events, starting with the very savage terrorist attack of 7 October, should cause China to give pause about its current approach to the Middle East. It's not sustainable. It's not sustainable to try to maintain an equidistant relationship between Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Iran, and try to remain neutral, or at least try not to commit yourself on acts of terrorism as occurred on 7 October. That has damaged China in the Middle East. Now, nobody is ever going to shun China. Nobody is ever going to refuse to deal with the China, whether in the Middle East or in any sub-region. But China needs to look at itself in the context of changes in the world and in the Middle East specifically. Let me make one more point and then I'll shut up. I promise you, Tommy. What are those changes in the world? I think D.S. Lambert mentioned some of them, but those are not by any means an exhaustive list. All of us, whichever region we are in, face two fundamental sets of realities. First of all, I think there is now better appreciation that we have to deal with both the US and China. And this is not a choice between them. And the fact is that dealing with the US or helping the US in our sub-regions is a necessary condition of dealing with China in a situation of equilibrium. Without the US, there's no equilibrium. And I think what has happened after 7 October in the Middle East during the war in Gaza underscores that reality. The US is still the only external power with any influence who can maintain some kind of balance in the Middle East. Second, while we must deal with both the US and China, all of us have concerns about some aspect or another of US behavior as well as Chinese behavior. The concerns are not the same, nor are they held with the same intensity, but they exist. Now you put these two sets of realities together, what do you get? You get, first of all, a situation such as that D.S. Lambert did describe, where you have the development of the Quad, trilateral cooperation, AUKUS, and so on, and also quiet but significant efforts by key countries in the Indo-Pacific to improve their defense relations with the US in order to promote balance. But because we do have concerns, and we promote balance because we are concerned about certain aspects of Chinese behavior. But at the same time, because we have concerns about US behavior, I think you're going to see an increasing move towards countries, including US allies, US partners, and US friends, to seek greater strategic flexibility. I don't like this term strategic autonomy. It's too stark and doesn't really capture what people are trying to do. But strategic flexibility, so as to be able to deal with the ambiguities and the concerns resulting from certain aspects of US behavior. And that gives Israel an opportunity through your global initiative to play a role, not just in your own region, which will always be your main priority, but in other regions, including the Indo-Pacific.
Thank you.
I'll shut up now.
Yes. Don't worry, I will come back to you.
Oh dear.
Professor Suzuki. Professor Suzuki, but Japan views Israel a bit more cautiously. But is it interested in a more engaged Israel in the Indo-Pacific?
Well, first of all, I think the role of Israel in the Indo-Pacific is not being in the sort of a bigger picture, because if you go into these pictures that is in the diplomatic blue book, that the Indo-Pacific doesn't cover the Mediterranean or the seas that is above the Arabian Sea. So I think it's not in the vision of the from a Japanese point of view that Israel is a part of the Indo-Pacific. But nevertheless, I think Israel has played a very significant role in the Middle East, and in terms of the regional stability, I think Israel has so much role to play. And from a Japanese point of view, the Middle East is critical importance because of the supply of oil and gas, of course, but also there are a number of issues with regard to the recent development in the Gulf states, particularly the Saudi Arabia and the UAE, because of the decarbonization, the reduction of the consumption of the fossil fuel, creates the opportunity for Japan to penetrate more in the Middle Eastern economy. And I think Japan will be able to play in terms of the collaborator in the industrial development in the Middle East. And of course, the collaboration with Israel has been very important. Before the October 7th, there was an increasing amount of investment in Israel, and there was a significant interest in developing not only the civilian technology, but also the dual-purpose technologies, including drones and the sensors. So I think there are a lot in common as a bilateral collaboration with Israel. And coming back to the main theme of the middle power, I think I share the sentiment with Dr. Blanchett about sort of a discomfort of the use of the word middle power, because there are a lot of this debate in Japan about whether Japan is a middle power or not. There are, certain, certainly Japan is the economic, the third, fourth largest economy, but at the same time, we are very small in the military role. So the geostrategic power in Japan is not exactly the middle power, or rather small power. But when it comes to the geo-economic power, Japan is fairly playing a significant role, like Dr. Blanchett says, the Netherlands. The Netherlands is playing a very significant geo-economic role. So it's a geo-economic giant, but the geopolitical not so giant. So,
It's
yeah.
polite,
So I
yes.
think these kind of distinctions is necessary because of this. Not just the power, the measurement of the power has changed. So we need to inclusively taking those different measurements into account.
Thank you. Brigadier General Abu Rukun, you're a veteran of the Israeli defense establishment. And also, you had considerable roles also in the diplomatic sphere, also in the president's residence and also in China. And I would argue that one of the major stumbling blocks for Israel in pursuing this Indo-Pacific future is getting the Israeli establishment to rethink its position and, you know, maybe, as we used to call it, change its diskette. How do we do that? Is it possible?
Well, Israel has many interests. When we talk about each country of the Indo-Pacific countries, and I think that we are developing our interests when we have common ground, common values, and also economic interest, of course. When Israel decided to open, for example, a military attaché office in Tokyo lately, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, it was not in order to punish anyone, of course not China. It was in order to develop the bilateral interests with Tokyo. When we have a very good relations with India, it's not in order to punish China. It's because we have common interests with India. And I think we should continue develop consistently our bilateral relations with any countries in the region. Of course, I think if we are consistent, that will, with our values, I think it will serve the whole region, and I wouldn't categorize ourselves as a middle power or a small power. We are who we are, and we have our own dimension and size. Of course, when it comes to defense, we have a lot to contribute to many countries, and we are happy to contribute, especially when it comes to defense systems. Most of our sales to the region is defense systems and not offensive systems. We are very proud to bring to our friends in the Indo-Pacific the Iron Dome, for example, system, or the armored defense systems. So Me'il Ruach and Kipat Barzel. And I think we should continue those without any specific intention related China directly.
So, Clarice, you've heard Brigadier General Rukun. What do you say?
First of all, I think it's so interesting, this hesitation about the world middle power. I think it's an issue of semantics, perhaps, but also perception. I talked, when I was introducing the Global Israel Initiative, the power of perception. I think it's 99% of the law. Reality is what we perceive. And if we perceive ourselves in a certain way, we are that way. And you see the humble Japanese and the humble Israelis don't want to say the term middle power. I do agree with Jude. Niche power is very interesting. And I think it definitely is pointed and focused, as niche means. But I think it misses the importance of the potential for a country like Israel, which is so regionally oriented and for very good reason has a tremendous amount of limitation in its ability to look beyond the region, because look what's going on right now. We have so many of our husbands and sons and brothers in the reserves, or our children fighting, or brothers fighting in various places around the country because we're fighting a multi-front war. And we are reminded that we have to focus on our security. If we don't have the basic physical security, we can't really do much else. So I think it's incumbent upon us to remember there's a reason why Japan wanted to open a military attaché office after almost 17 years. There's a change in Japan's views of itself, a change in its views of the region, and a change in its views of Israel. And there are many factors that lead into that. China is a player, the US is a player, the Abraham Accords are a player. The more we are able to cooperate with the region, the more comfortable the world is in cooperating with us. And I believe that, this is a horrible moment. I made Aliyah in 1987. And honestly, I lived through everything we've all lived through all those years. The Second Intifada was horrific. And in some ways, this is worse. And people say, oh, of course it's worse. Well, we were getting blown up every other day back then in the early 2000s. Today, the world is perceiving and misperceiving us. Today, we had a session earlier where the Singapore ambassador, Singapore only recently established an embassy here, although we've had excellent relations. Israel's had excellent relations with Singapore for decades. And he said, it's so important. We're realizing now how important it is for us to be here because we are seeing what's happening on the ground and how otherwise what's happening is so misunderstood elsewhere. So to sum up, I would say that Israel is a middle power by the definition of middle power, punching above your weight. Again, I refer to UAE and Qatar, very small countries who don't have big, vast militaries, but they are influencing things all over the place. And I would like to just also thank all of you for your input and your comments, because I think it's helping all of us sort of have this idea of what is a middle power and how Israel can work with the Indo-Pacific countries going forward.
Thank you. Mr. Blanchett, but do you think that and I'm coming back to a point that also Bilahari made, and I want to turn to your expertise also on China. Israel acting as the middle power in Indo-Pacific, could that help with China's rather adversarial position towards Israel?
No, is the short answer. And I'd like to be optimistic about this, but I think there's a variety of factors that are going to make China's view towards Israel increasingly, I hate to use the word hostile, but certainly seeing Israel on the wrong side of Chinese grand strategy for several reasons. I think one is the close relationship between the United States and Israel is, from Beijing's point of view, putting Israel squarely in the U.S. camp in what Beijing sees as a sort of a global campaign by the West to contain China. Second is China's strengthening relationship with Iran. There's a number of reasons driving that. It's a complex issue, but I think that also puts a sort of a structural hurdle in the way of improving Israel ties. And then the final one is areas where Israel has been staunch supporter of, say, Taiwan, and vice versa, by the way. Taiwan has been a strong partner of Israel's, given its own challenging strategic neighborhood. Puts Israel, unless it's willing to fundamentally back away from Taiwan, in the center of the bullseye. So I think also, if we were having this conversation on October 6th of last year, my comments may have been around how Beijing was looking to improve its relationship with Israel. That's gone now, obviously. I mean, even for me, I've been surprised at how vicious China's rhetoric has been since October 7th. So I think that the conversation is now no longer how do you find a modus vivendi with China? How do you find a balanced relationship that is both competitive and cooperative? I just think that ship has sailed.
Ambassador Kelsey Khan. So, from your perspective, and knowing also these, you know, I would say both sides. You know the Israelis rather well, and the Chinese rather well. What are the prospects of, or do you agree with Mr. Blanchett that there's nothing much we can do, especially not since October 7?
Well, I think October 7 has exposed the the hollowness of the Chinese strategy towards the Middle East. It tried to be neutral, it tried to be equidistant, it tried to not take a position, actually. After October 7, that's simply not a tenable position. And as Jude mentioned, I think I have been a bit surprised by the viciousness of Chinese rhetoric, right? So it's exposed China in a sense. It's up to China. The biggest, as I said earlier, the biggest influence on China is China. So it will have to recalculate how it wants to define its interest in the Middle East and where Israel fits into that. I think Chinese are not naive. They know that they will never be Israel's best friend. Israel will never forsake the United States for China. But Israel is not an inconsequential power, both in the Middle East and globally in certain niche areas. Paris, like Jude, I don't like the term middle power, and I like Jude's term niche areas, niche power, because that's what I was groping at too. However, where I slightly differ from Jude is that I think Israel's behavior in the Indo-Pacific, and it's up to you, Israel, to choose how you're going to implement this, what is your risk appetite, and so on. I think the Brigadier General mentioned the Iron Dome. Strategic sales of the Iron Dome can make a strategic difference in the Indo-Pacific, in certain sub-theaters, shall we say. So, but it's up to Israel whether it has the stomach to do that.
Which sub-theaters were you referring to, just to make sure that we all understand each other? We can't hear you, though. And when it comes to the interesting bits. Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, did you hear me? I thought I was muted somehow.
Yes, all right. So, again, so to which sub-region were you referring to?
Okay, for example, should you sell the Iron Dome to Taiwan? It will change the strategic balance to some degree, I think.
All right. Short of that.
But are you prepared to do so? That's a decision for Israel to think so. I mentioned the Iron Dome because the Brigadier General mentioned it.
But let me ask you, and if we would sell it, for instance, to Japan, would that make a difference with China?
I don't think so, because I think China has quite a realistic view of Japan. I don't think it's not going to help. It's not going to fundamentally change the Japanese view of China. The country that can change the Japanese view of China is China, and they're not prepared to do that.
I see. But curiously, would Japan be interested in closer defense R&D relations with Israel?
Oh, definitely, yes. Iron Dome, I mean, because of the distances and geography, the Iron Dome is designed to shoot down the slower missiles and drones. So basically, I think the major threat from North Korea and China is ballistic missiles, and U.S. Patriots and SM-3, the missile defense system is already in place in Japan, but these are not enough to meet those challenges. So I think the Arrow systems, etc., is also another opportunities to expand the defense cooperation. Whether it will be possible or not depends on the sort of defense procurement strategy, which is not yet in the sort of a list. But so far, the reason why the Israeli embassy has the military attaché, and the Japanese embassy also have a military attaché is basically to seek the opportunity to have defense technology cooperation, especially on the drones and the sensors and the various means. I think it is extremely important for Japan to have this very practical and pragmatic relationship with Israel, to build up industrial dual-use technology capabilities, and I think it is at the end will be a major importance for Japan, because the increase of the defense spending of Japan is now largely shifted to the military R&D and industrial cooperation.
So, but let me make it, I want to try and make it more enticing for the Israeli end, if you don't mind. And I'll turn to Mr. Blanchard, but whoever wants to respond can jump in. There's been considerable chatter about expanding AUKUS, Pillar 2 of AUKUS specifically, which is about technology, R&D, cooperation. The three partners have acknowledged that Japan is considered, and there are other applicants, actually not only from the Indo-Pacific, well, Britain is not anyway an Indo-Pacific country, others considered are Canada and the Republic of Korea. Would it not make sense also to open the door in one way or another for Israel? Is that realistic?
You know, the first challenge would be incorporating an I into AUKUS and still getting the nice sound of it. So, you know, JAWKUS works, which is the only reason we're considering Japan. Obviously, just kidding. It's an interesting thought, for sure. And I think, again, it speaks to the idea that as the United States and the broad array of democracies build out a long-term competitive military strategy that has both, you know, deterrent signaling now, but also functional capabilities later, we're going to need to be flexible and adaptive in terms of the partners and countries that are involved. I think it's probably a long ways off from expanding something like AUKUS, which is very regionally focused and has very specific niche reasons for why, in the initial instance, it was the UK and Australia that joined the United States. I'd be hesitant to say that there should be any rush to really expand what is already, to be honest, turning out to be a challenging trilateral relationship to manage. And I'm not sure, honestly, Israel would find it in its interest now to be binding itself to something that is still very much a challenging work in progress. Going back to Karis's point, I think this is really a time for where Israel has a lot of flexibility and has the opportunity to sort of shape its own vision for exactly where it's going to work in its own interests. You know, bridging a divide between the Indo-Pacific and its home territory. And of course, we're seeing increasingly that there is an interlinkage. What is happening in the Indo-Pacific is streaming through Russia and into the Middle East. So I would just say, you know, don't run and rush into joining things. I think there's time to sort of strategically think about exactly the role Israel can play.
Can I add something, Tommy?
Yes, one say yes. Professor Ambassador Kelsigan?
No, I just want to echo what Jude said. I think rather than joining things formally, Israel should think of informal collaborations, say in R&D, with various actors in the Indo-Pacific. That would be much more effective, and it will give you much more strategic flexibility.
All right.
I think expanding on AUKUS is not a sort of a nature of AUKUS. I think it was initially designed to build a nuclear submarine for Australia, and that was particular needs for the Australians to monitor and patrol the Pacific Ocean and vis-a-vis to defend the first island chain. So the nature of AUKUS is basically targeting or the focusing on the stability of the Western Pacific, and that is the basic conceptual understanding. And therefore, I think it is important that there is a certain contribution from the Israeli side to say, and this is again a very much maritime oriented idea. So having an AI and sensors in AUKUS Pillar 2 is pretty much based on the demand or the requirements from the securing the stability in the Western Pacific. That's the basic objective. So if there is something to contribute to that sort of a protection or to develop the technology and the equipment which are fit to serve the purpose, that would be that may justify the reason to expand the AUKUS to Israel.
Clarice?
I understand and agree with the suggestions on the screen that we should maintain our strategic flexibility. That also is a much more comfortable place for Israel to be, and it makes sense given that we have to move quickly in many different situations. But if we look at the opportunities, Signal Group was in Japan last November. We were in India in March, and this is all during the war, remember. And we received a tremendously warm welcome. We were supposed to be taking our Goodman Fellows with us. This is a fellowship we launched at our last conference, where mid-level executives from the government join us in China and in Japan to better understand how to work with China. And the Japanese have so much experience, so we go there as well. They couldn't come because of the war, and yet we received a tremendously warm welcome, not because of our beautiful eyes, but because of Israel's added value, because they are interested in, and many people know, India's military cooperation, defense cooperation with Israel is extremely strong and growing, and yet they are looking for wider relations, wider tech relations on so many levels. Every single meeting, we were told that Israel is the third most important country to India when it comes to technology, tech transfer, et cetera. That's pretty high up there. In Japan, also, they're at a different stage in their military transformation, and so it wasn't as pronounced, but the openness and interest in Israeli added value of the niche areas that you're all familiar with, that I mentioned earlier, these are tremendous opportunities. And then we can look at South Korea, Vietnam, and beyond, and see how we must test the waters, no pun intended.
And as much as this conversation is fascinating, we could go on for more. I want to ask Brigadier General Dr. Abu-Rukun to sum up and tell us, we talk here about the opportunities, the limits, the constraints, but does the Israeli establishment realize these opportunities? Are we pursuing them effectively enough? What do we need to do to move this ship, look a bit eastwards also?
Well, to be realistic, we are in a period that we are so much focused in our own problems and our own region, and looking beyond is a bit difficult. And I am not sure we are doing it enough. So still,
Did we do it enough before October 7th?
No, before October 7th, we have some approach to improve and to push forward our bilateral relations. I don't think that anyone would consider joining AUKUS, even not as a joke, because this is beyond it's putting ourselves in the first line of confronting China very directly. This is not us. I think it would be a big mistake to put ourselves there. We have enough of our own issues to solve, but that doesn't mean that we cannot collaborate with each one of the AUKUS and other countries in the region, the whole Indo-Pacific, from a bilateral approach, and also for our interests. Doing R&D is very much legitimate, and all this behind the scenes. I think Israel should always be careful not to insult China directly. There is no need for that, and we have so much ups and downs with with our relations with China for so many reasons that are not connected to us. We all know the real reasons, and the Chinese are not naive. They know the real reasons. So let's put always seeds for the better day and not focus on like our revenge sense or, for example, anything like that. Because we all the Israelis, since October 7, are very much frustrated from the Chinese response to anything. Even not condemning Hamas is a terrible thing, unacceptable. But still, we have to consider the so much complicated reasons behind the scenes.
Well, on a more, you provided a sentence earlier, a more optimistic note. So I think we need to end here. Also, if I'm not mistaken, Ambassador Kalsikan has a flight to catch, and we want to wish him safe travels. And I guess that Mr. Blanchard has to attend to other more demanding calls right now. We want to thank Professor Suzuki for making it here, and wishing you also a safe journey home tonight. And thank our local participants also. And we are ready now for the next session, so thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, I will remain seated with your permission. And I have to apologize if people think that I'm looking at my telephone just because the telephone keeps me on track in terms of scheduling, yes, and participants. Yes, we are waiting. Running a conference these days is like the stories from Star Trek, waiting for somebody to be, they call it beam me up, Scotty. I guess the most of the audience doesn't know what I'm talking about. Shocking. So I will start until we get the individuals. Yes, Dr. Xu, I see, joining us from Beijing. And we are waiting also for Ambassador Talo to join us. Let me introduce the session on Europe and China-US relations. Should Israel be taking notes? Now, some might wonder, why did we choose this session specifically? And why do we dedicate some time to discussing, of all issues, China-European relations and the European approach towards China and vice versa? But I think we think that it actually can shed light on understanding the dynamics behind how China views the world and how other countries are also facing some of the dilemmas that we are facing too. We had one speaker, now we don't have anyone? No, we have one speaker still. Yes. Is anybody? But you know, I will start with your permission. I will introduce Dr. Xu, who is with the Center for
China
with the China
Institute of
International Studies, exactly,
Yeah.
which is a think tank of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China. So essentially, Dr. Xu advises, and she works for the Department of European Studies at the China Institute. And in that respect, they advise the Chinese government on European issues. And she's an expert on China-European relations and on European integration. And while we are waiting for Ambassador Tallow to join us, Dr. Xu, President Xi was recently in Europe. He visited France, he visited Serbia, he visited Hungary. What is the strategy of China vis-a-vis Europe? Does it really want to divide and conquer? Does it really want to separate Europe from the United States? Do you think it's achieving any progress in that respect? Please.
I think China and Europe for a long time with each other as partners. And China never changed its position even now. So in this visit, you know that we're still stressful. We are partners. We are not rivals or competitors. We're still trying to find our common consensus and the benefits and interests. So I think this is our big direction in this area. So for China, we take EU as one important pole in the multipolarity world and key players in multilateral cooperation and global governance and dialogue among different civilizations. So I think European side has echoed and responded to this area positively. And I think in this visit, the two sides reached the various cooperation consensus. So this is our basis.
I understand, but you must admit, at least from my point of view, if I'm looking at this from the side, vis-a-vis the visit of President Macron, I understand his visit to Paris. Paris is, France is one of the major European powers.
Yeah.
But then his next stops are Serbia. Why Serbia? It's not even a member of the European Union yet. So, there are other countries he could have visited, I'm sure. Why Serbia?
China and Serbia has very long historical strong relations with each other. Even though Serbia is not a big country, but it has the historical, destiny or the fortune.
You're talking about the days of Yugoslavia, I assume. That the days of Tito and Yugoslavia, which was before Serbia was born after the end of the Cold War. You're referring to that old relationship. I understand. So it has nothing to do with the fact that there is an attempt on behalf, perhaps, of China and Russia to drive a wedge in Europe. That's pure, how would I say it, Cold War mentality?
I don't think so. In our regards, China and Serbia demonstrated new types of relationship cooperation. Like we take small country equally in our relationship in Europe. And Serbia is also a very important country in our Middle East European country cooperations. We have lots of common interests in economic field, and also we have a lot of exchange of cultures like that. We just want to make this visit demonstrating different type of relationship we have with Europe, not just big countries, also small countries, also countries that not belongs to European Union. We have France, it's in Western Europe. We have Hungary, that's in Eastern Europe. We also have Serbia. It's outside of European Union, just like that.
I see. We were supposed to have Ambassador Tallow with us, And I was about to ask him a question about Italy's withdrawal from the BRI on one hand, and its fascination and interest with the new project called, which isn't still is still on paper, the IMEC, the India, Middle East, European Economic Corridor, that was announced. Oh, and just I'm saying that, and then we see Ambassador Tallo joining us, but still I'll complete my question to you. When you, in September last year, the EU and 3 European countries, France, Germany, and Italy, signed a memorandum of understanding that alongside India, the United States, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE to establish an economic corridor connecting Europe and India through the Middle East. How does China view this project, even though it's still on the paper? Does China have a view of this? On IMEC? Dr. Shu?
You asked me?
Yes, of course.
Okay. I'm not sorry. I didn't hear it clearly. Can you repeat
All
your
right, so I'll
question?
repeat it very briefly. What is China's approach to the India, Middle East, European corridor that was announced last September?
Yeah. I'm not quite familiar with the
All
India
right,
issue.
I understand. Then I will ask Ambassador. Fine.
Okay,
I'm not familiar
okay,
with everything,
that's fine.
but I'll ask Ambassador Tallo. Because Ambassador Tallo, you until recently, and I'm introducing you to the audience, you now are a senior advisor to the Minister of Defense, but you're also the diplomatic advisor to Prime Minister Meloni, and you accompanied her to the G20 summit in New Delhi in September, where the memorandum of understanding signing, establishing the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor was announced. And a few months later, if I recall correctly, Italy decided to withdraw from the BRI. Why did Italy go for, I say politely, go for IMEC and withdraw from BRI?
Thank you. I would not emphasize a relationship between the two facts. As it has been also stressed during another session earlier, there are differences between BRI and IMEC, so one cannot consider IMEC as an alternative to BRI, as a sub BRI. They have quite a different character. So the
Granted.
two.
So let me take you back to the BRI decision and to the dilemmas that Italy faced when it had to weigh, do we continue with BRI or withdraw from BRI?
Well,
Can you give us some background to this calculus?
Yes. Well, now just to connect with the previous question. So for IMEC, we consider the interest of having an interesting vision, a positive vision, which is a regional one, and important advantages, a very concrete one. Even if they are for the future. I mean, there is nothing in this moment implemented. For BRI, we had an experience of a few years without important results, and we just wanted. I mean, I'm not now in an official position, but I think that what is relevant is that there is the interest to develop an important relationship with China, but not necessarily through the BRI. Actually, BRI is a tool which is used almost only with the different kind of countries. Italy was the only country to have to be part of this program. So it was an exception. Now, intention is to be like other 7 European countries, to have good and important economic relationship with China, without necessarily to have be part of BRI. In fact, I think it was we had a very good dialogue with counterparts, and now this dialogue is continuing, and there are good perspectives to have a relationship similar to the one that is between China and Germany or France, which never joined BRI, and have a much more important, a much larger trade relationship and economic relationship with China. So BRI for us was not such a big deal on the economic point of view, because at the end of the day is an economic relationship.
I understand, but let me just make it a bit harder for you then, if you don't mind. But let's you're talking about the commercial interests, you're talking about geopolitical interests, but to what extent, and you've been seeing also when you served as Italy's permanent representative to NATO, then later on with serving alongside the Prime Minister, there is this constant evaluation vis-a-vis China of commercial interests, geopolitical interests of your own country, and also the U.S. U.S. involvement in this process. How has this relationship shifted in the past few years? Is Europe getting closer to China, growing more distant from China? The war in Ukraine is obviously interfering here. Your thoughts, and then I'll go back to Dr. Shu.
Well, I think, of course, I mean, one has to take into account many factors. The current war of aggression, Russian aggression to Ukraine, is part of the global picture. China is out of it. Of course, we are following the Russian-Chinese relationship, but I don't think that this is a main factor in our relationship. We only want to have, let's say, a good bilateral or multilateral relationship about the European Union, because speaking about economy, Europe must have a major role. And on the same time, of course, we have to take into account our interest in order that this relationship is fair and is based on considerations on our own security. Then you take into account these aspects. Of course, we are all like to have a win-win possibility of growing together. So this is the harmonious way to grow, to work for common interests. When we have common interests, we can do things. When we don't have common interests, we see that there are and work together. Why, for instance, we have other relationships. BRI was the case. Bilateral agreements and dialogue can certainly be useful, both at national or EU level. And then, of course, take into consideration common general interest in what this morning has been called common goods. For instance, freedom of navigation. I think that we all share the interest of having freedom of navigation when we consider the situation in the Red Sea, a country like China is a very strong importer, but also somehow an important importer of goods, should have this same interest that we in Europe are having, that our goods can flow without problem in the Indo-Pacific and Mediterranean.
Thank you, Ambassador Talo. Dr. Shu, coming back to you. And, you know, I apologize for being a bit straightforward. To what extent has the war in Ukraine affected China's position in Europe from your perspective? And how has China tried to deal with this?
I think from China's point of view, China-EU relations have heavily burdened by the Ukraine conflict because China is not one party of the conflict. And now we think EU want to bind China-EU relations to China-Russia relations. We think this is unnecessary and unreasonable. I think like many other global South countries, China sees its relationship with Russia is independent and not against the third party. So it should not be pressured or coerced by others. But currently, lots of Europeans think China-Russia cooperation is against Europe's interest. We think that is not reasonable. And for China, we think China-EU relations is should be more robust and not be burdened by this conflict.
All right. Ambassador Talo, any thoughts on your side?
Well,
because in a way, because because in a way I think, although there are differences, of course, that just as China's response to the war in Ukraine has affected relations with Europe, China's response to the war in Gaza is affecting its relations with Israel and with other partners. So how do you see this from a European perspective? China's relations vis-a-vis actors in the Middle East and vis-a-vis Russia?
well, an important power like China is relevant always. I mean, it's the nature of being an important power, and the responsibilities which are inherent with this status. So it is completely justified, actually necessary, that China takes its own responsibilities, and that China has a role as one of the main global players. This is part of history. China is one of the top players in the world. So whatever it does can have implications, both with the aggression of Russia towards Ukraine, or Israeli-Palestinian conflict, including the aggression of Hamas to Israel. So the situation can be different case to case, and we consider what is being done, and hope, of course, that there will be no sustain to Russia in any form, also in indirect form. On the other hand, we hope that there can be a very constructive support from China, for instance, also in the UN, to the construction of a two-state solution, which is the solution supported both by China and the Union, hopefully also from Israel.
Well, we have to stop here at this point. I want to thank you both, Dr. Shu, at this rather late hour in Beijing. I want to thank you, Ambassador Taleb, for taking the time to join us again today. And I want to invite Felice Witter to the stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask the people who are outside having coffee to come in. I think they're going to want to be here for this. And so whoever can step out and tell our friends to join us, because we are taking a moment away from the proceedings to focus on something that is affecting each and every one of us. And I'm talking about every single person in Israel. It's also affecting the world in many ways, but not in the way it is affecting us. What happened on October 7 was a barbaric attack, and we're in the midst of a multi-front war. And the painful reality is that Hamas is still, to this day, holding so many Israeli hostages. And to address this, we're grateful to have Udi Goren, who is the cousin of Tal Chaimi, who was murdered by Hamas on October 7, and his body was taken hostage to Gaza. Udi.
Good afternoon, honorable guests. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for the organizers who have put together this remarkable event and have made a point to hold time for you to hear about the most pressing and dire issue Israel is facing these days. My name is Udi Goren, and I am the cousin of Tal Chaimi, who was murdered on October 7th, and his body is still held by Hamas in Gaza. At the time of his murder, Tal had 3 children. 3 weeks ago, his wife, Ella, gave birth to their 4th orphan child. Since October 7th, our family's life has become a succession of disappointments and anxiety, as it's been over 7 months since Tal was taken to Gaza, and there's still no sign of a deal that would bring him back. In fact, no hostage has been saved for 5 months, and for 5 long and tormented months. Last night, the entire country watched a censored video of the kidnapping of 5 of the female soldiers who were captured, abused, terrorized, and taken. No human soul can remain untouched when watching this video of 19-year-old girls scared for their lives, sitting by dozens of bodies of their friends who were just slain in front of their eyes, and not knowing whether or not they would be next to die. Being fully aware of what they have been through, living with it and coping with it, has been our reality for the past 7.5 months. However, they are still living the same terror every day. They are still at the mercy of those heartless savages suffering physical abuse, mental abuse, and sexual abuse. They are still living the October 7th horrors every single day. And yet the Israeli government hasn't brought them back home to this very day. We know that many of the ministers have watched this video. We know that hundreds of thousands of Israelis have watched this video since last night. Everybody watching it must put themselves in the shoes of these girls and their parents. Can you even fathom the horror? Can you smell the death in the air? After going through this horrendous experience, these girls also have to endure the risks of surviving in Hamas tunnels under constant bombing by the Israeli military. Still, for some, it wasn't the obvious thing that we must pursue negotiations all the time in order to strike a deal that would bring them back home. The negotiations have been in a stalemate for a couple of weeks now, and only yesterday were resumed. Even if, in some way or another, this halt was beneficial to the negotiations, these are 2 more weeks that these girls have gone through the torture that has become their life. How is it possible that the decision makers in Israel or worldwide can look at this video and still say anything but bring them home now? To be honest, many of the world leaders have said just that recently. A month ago, the US has released a declaration, along with 17 other countries, which states that anything must be done in order to release the hostages as soon as possible. A month has gone past, and nothing. Yes, we are facing a vile enemy that would do anything in his power to harm us. But we are Israel. We have a powerful military, a solid economy, and the international guarantees that would keep us safe for the near future, even if the war is over. I did not elect Hamas and have no expectations of it. I am an Israeli, the only people in this world who represent me and should be taking care of my well-being and that of Tal's family is the Israeli government. Only they and none other have the responsibility to solve this catastrophe for Israel. The same people who were in power on the day of October 7th and failed to protect Tal, the rest of my family, and myself. After 7.5 months, we, the hostage families, the internally displaced from northern and southern Israel, the bereaved families and the reserve soldiers, we demand to know what's the plan. What's the end game of this war? How do they intend to get my cousin back when there's no talk about the day after? And I'll add one last thing for the business people in the audience. War is bad for business. Instability is bad for business. Losing international support is bad for business. I don't need to tell you that Israel has a wealth of knowledge, skills, and technology to offer the world like no other country. You wouldn't be here otherwise. But nobody can really be fully productive and ingenious when their main concern is for their drafted brother or hostage cousin. We need this war to end so we can begin to heal and thrive again, bring back the hostages, and going back to being the startup nation that we are. Thank you.
Do I have a mic? Thank you. I want to thank Udi very much for that. And I would like to now move into the next session. And I've been frantically trying to work with the team here because we have so many technical difficulties. But I hope we'll now connect to our, we should have Neo online. Are we not getting any connection? He has the link. So sorry about this today. The reason we have so many speakers online is because of the situation you just heard about. And this is leading to many more technical difficulties than we expected or would like to have, of course. And so what we were hoping to discuss with our Chinese colleagues, should they be able to join, is their perspective on what's been happening in the region, in Israel, and on the world stage. To hear the Chinese viewpoint and hopefully be able to better understand why they're making the choices that they're making. However, if they're not here to speak, we're going to have to make some adjustments to the schedule. So can I get some input? I received word that at least one of them should be on. Can you fill me in? Sorry. Well, we want to hear their point of view from their mouth, because from the outside, China's perspective and statements and actions with respect to what's happened since October 7 have been so challenging for Israel. At first, you may be aware, President Xi Jinping responded to October 7 the next day saying we need a two-state solution. And of course, that sounded to our ears like the barbaric attack should lead to a benefit. And that did not take into consideration who would be part of that two-state solution. Would it be Hamas, the same Hamas that just carried that out and made it clear, not too many days later, that they would carry this act out again over and over and over, in their words, until they had put an end to the Jews of Israel. So it was very confusing to hear the Chinese perspective. We also saw the legal advisor from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs sitting with Hamas and discussing their position, which we perceive as being a legitimization of Hamas. And China came out with a statement in this context that armed struggle is justified, implying that what was carried out on October 7 was armed struggle, and justifying that as well. Again, these are the, you heard from our guests, one in Singapore, one in the US, used that word vicious, the vicious Chinese. I don't know that that's the word I would use, but certainly a kind of aggressiveness we haven't seen in the past. And then recently, one more point on the Chinese side, and then questions is a great idea. China invited the leaders of Hamas and Fatah to Beijing in order to bring them together and unify so that they could stand as one and receive a state. So from our perspective, again, Hamas should not be in this role. And there are many Hamas operatives who are in Judea and Samaria. And the whole landscape is much more complex and challenging, and encouraging this, pressing Israel in directions that do not support its security are really problematic for those of us who are here. Questions? Can I ask you to, I have all these wonderful microphones here. Can we get all the mics on? It should be, try again. Just try. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
hi. Well, my question is regarding the Chinese shipping company, COSCO, that suspended, let's say, their businesses here in Israeli ports. Was that related to the political aspects or to the economic aspects? And does China have a difference when it comes to continuing the economic side? Like obviously Israel is a market that they cannot disregard. So
They can. They can disregard our market. We're a tiny market by comparison to the Middle East. And I would say that the choice, I left that out, Costco's decision to stop supplying to Israel was a political one. And we can ask ourselves, from our perspective, what could be these reasons? I think we heard to some extent the implications today that China came out on the other side of where the US stood. The US stood stalwartly in the very beginning with Israel. So it was natural for China, which sees itself in competition with the US, to take the opposite decision or the opposite position. And everything that we have seen since then is flowing from that. I don't think there's a moral, I mean, maybe the Chinese would say so, but I don't think that if you look at the Chinese support of the Palestinians, when the U.S. recently gave about $300 million of aid to the Palestinians, and I'm not talking about aid going into Gaza, I'm talking about general aid, the Chinese gave 1 million. They have never been financial supporters. They don't put their money where their mouth is. They've been inviting Israelis and Palestinians who do not have decision-making power per se in the issue of a two-state solution. They've been inviting them to Beijing since about 2017 or 18, almost every year, COVID notwithstanding, in order to contribute to this solution. But that contribution doesn't lead to anything for Israel and has led to nothing for the Palestinians substantively. But it did give some public relations benefits to China. And I mentioned in my opening remarks, for those of you who are here, that China says it is the leader of the global South, that it needs those numbers. We know that in the United Nations, China is looking to ensure that it has the support of as many of those 130 countries as is possible, so that when it puts forward a vote, that it can get the numbers. And standing opposite the U.S. is one of the ways to achieve that. Standing against Israel is another way, especially when the world has so quickly, the West, has so quickly taken on an anti-Israel stance on campuses and in so many other places. So the Red Sea choices are mainly political and geopolitical. Yes. Can you just say your name and your, a mic is better, then everyone can hear, as well as, I think, maybe.
Hello. Hi, my name is Ishai. I wanted to ask, recently there's more and more talk about China being past its peak, and because of different internal issues, whether it's demographics or the real estate bubble, that the China we speak of today might not be the China we speak of in a few years. If that is true from the Israel perspective, can that help Israel and be in our interest, or maybe the opposite, maybe push China away from us?
Well, first of all, I want to stress that it's in our interest always to maintain relations with China on some level. Every country has relations. Every country must have relations of one kind or another. And just like everybody needs to deal with the U.S., everyone needs to deal with China, and we should as well. At the same time, referencing your point about China and its peak, China's going through a plethora of internal problems that are extremely serious. So a number of the policies, the economic policies that were put forward in 2021 have led to have contributed to the downturn economically. China has reprioritized away from development to trying to find a balance between security and development. And that has made growth slower, jobs harder to get. They stopped publishing youth unemployment because the youth unemployment was skyrocketing. There's a phenomenon taking place in China called lying flat, which is young people giving up on the competitive process and get ahead, work hard, make more money, and have a better future. They see that they graduate from college, and they've had last year, I think 11 million college graduates, and every year there are more. So imagine that's more than every man, woman, and child in Israel is looking for a new job. And they're offered jobs that are working in the equivalent of Burger King. Well, actually, I think it's Kentucky Fried Chicken in China, after they have a college degree. So the economic problems are rife, and they are just one data point on the challenges. The foreign direct investment dropped by 80% last year, and that is a huge problem for China. But am I being told that we're ready for the next session because this one isn't happening? Okay, so I apologize for missing the opportunity to hear from the Chinese. We'll have a Chinese guest in our next session. He's already online. We very much appreciate that, and I guess I'm now inviting former MK and minister, our friend and colleague Nitzan Horowitz and Tommy Steiner to the stage.
שלום, אחר צהריים טובים. אנחנו בעברית או באנגלית?
We are in English, but Nitzan said that
דברים חשובים אני אחזור עליהם גם בעברית כדי שיהיה ברור, כי
he
נגיד כאן
wants,
כמה דברים שעוד
no,
לא
but you
פורסמו.
wanted to say,
כן.
why did you want to say something in Hebrew?
Because I'm going to discuss some matters since October 7th that were not yet published, and it's important that people will know them, so I will repeat this in Hebrew as well.
Go ahead, don't let me stop you.
So we...
Yes.
Okay, so first of all, thank you very much, and thank you, Caris, for holding this very impressive summit here. And thank you, Professor Suzuki. It was a pleasure listening to you. תודה לך גם, טומי. Okay. It's important to notice what happened between Israel and China since October 7th. And I think the October 7th changed the whole balance of relationship between the two countries. If we go back, let's say, less than a year ago, it was June 23, Netanyahu, the Chinese ambassador, handed Netanyahu some books of Xi Jinping, signed by him.
Yeah, there are 4 volumes already.
Yes, 4 volumes. Governance in China, it's called.
Yes.
And Netanyahu was invited to China. And this was in the midst of the confrontation with the United States about the judicial coup.
Yes.
And so Netanyahu was trying to sort of counterweight the Biden's pressure by showing the Americans that he has this good relations with China, and China went along with that. And so, and this was the sort of the height of this
engagement
process. Okay. And then October 7th happened, and some things happened since. First of all, China refused to denounce the Hamas attack and put the entire blame on Israel. China not only refused to denounce Hamas attack on October 7th, the killing of civilians, the massacres, the rape, everything, but also the Israeli counterattack a few days later was also heavily criticized by China. And this was not the end of the thing. In February, you know that there is a process against Israel in the court in The Hague.
Yes.
And China emphasized its position in The Hague as if the Palestinians have the right to use force against foreign oppression, as they put it, in order to achieve self-determination and independent state. So China put the October 7th attack as a legitimate mean of using force by the oppressed Palestinians in order to achieve self-determination and Palestinian state, which is completely out of context and a very blunt lie, to say the least. At the same time, at the time that we visited China, end of October, November, also December, the Chinese networks, social networks, were filled with a lot of anti-Semitic comments and remarks and posts, and all of a sudden, And you know, some American analysts, they said that since the internet is not entirely free in China, when something like that happens, it means that there is some sort of green light from above to allow this. Last month, China accepted an official delegation by Hamas. And during the Iranian attack on Israel, the drones and the missiles,
April 14.
yes, again, China defined this unprecedented attack as an act of self-defense by Iran.
Yes. Okay.
And also the Chinese foreign minister said, told his Iranian counterpart, the Iranian foreign minister, that Iran handled well the situation. On the other side, Israel actually tried to remain cautious about China, not getting too much into a confrontation with Beijing. But it's interesting to remark that Israel silently signed some sort of a petition with other 50 governments against the Chinese crimes against humanity allegedly performed in Xinjiang. Something that Israel would not have done in a different context, I think. And it signals the resentment in Israel for the Chinese behavior. Also, it's important to notice that last month there was a visit of some Knesset members to Taiwan. No. Yes. And they met with the Taiwanese president. And he mentioned to them that the relations between Israel and Taiwan were closer than ever. כן? קרובים מאי פעם.
Yes.
Which is also what sort of a move.
An interesting statement.
An interesting statement, as you put it. Now, you know, there are signs in the Israeli business community that since October 7th and the Chinese position towards Israel, many in the business community now prefer to opt for India, for the Gulf states, less with China. You know, and I heard of some Israelis boycotting the Chinese אתרי הקניות באינטרנט, shopping apps and all that. Now, if this escalation continues, and it risks to continue, it is a possibility that this will escalate further on, then there are some things that might happen. For instance, there is the lease given to Shanghai company, the port company, to handle the container
port in Haifa.
Terminal, yes, in Haifa. This lease might be reconsidered by Israel. If
is that hypothetical?
It's hypothetical, but this is something that is being talked about as a possibility if things escalates. Look, if you have a country that's supposed to be in friendly relations, we have good relations with China, this is a good thing, economic, cultural, technological, security, diplomatic, but this country supports Iran, supports Hamas against Israel in a very fragile situation for Israel. We are at war now. And, well, you know, this is not a normal situation. And so you cannot expect Israel to remain silent when things like that are happening. Now, also, you know, when I talk to some American administration people, there is a growing איך אומרים?
I'll help. Interest, desire.
Not just in Israel, but also in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, about the Chinese unilateral position
Unilateral
supporting
position on what?
Iran,
On Iran, yes.
yes, and Russia. And as you know, Israel did not handle the Iranian attack on its own. It was helped by a Western coalition and also by an Arab coalition. And this coalition is not very happy with the Chinese getting so much in line with Iran and Russia, calling it the acts of resistance. You know, the Chinese term for this alliance with Russia and Iran, maybe some other countries, is axis of resistance. Resistance against whom? Against the United States, the Western democracy, and Israel.
Yes, of course.
And I think this is a dangerous direction.
Dangerous for whom?
It's dangerous for the region. It's dangerous for Israel. It's dangerous for maybe Chinese interests in the Middle East. It's dangerous for security. And I think this should be stopped. Now, you know, I don't think that China would stop supporting Iran just because I said so, but I think that supporting Iran in such a unilateral, blunt way, when Iran is attacking Israel in an unprecedented way with hundreds of drones and missiles, this is not clever.
But the Israeli response towards the Chinese position has been rather, well, officially rather muted.
Look,
and by the way, I have to ask you, since you've been inside government, you know, we have approached almost everybody inside government to come and talk here about Israel's China policy, and they have been over the years reluctant. Why is that the case?
Well, first of all, nowadays Israel has other priorities than China. We are at war. There is a situation in the north. We have kidnapped people in Gaza. The situation is quite serious in Israel. And now dealing with China, you know, is maybe number 20 on our priority list. But before the war, Israel tried, and I think Israel tried its best to play both sides. I mean, still cultivating relations with China, allowing trade, inviting the Chinese to invest here, doing business with China, you know, having good relations with China. You know, there is also a tradition, you know, Israel, many people forget, but Israel was the first country in the Middle East to recognize China. 1950, communist China, Mao Zedong, Israel was the first to recognize under Ben Gurion. But, well, that's a historic anecdote.
History.
But Israel tried its best to preserve our alliance, very important alliance with the United States, but still doing something substantial with China. You know that very well. And it was like sometimes tricky, sometimes difficult, under American pressure. They said that they were not putting pressure on us, but they put a lot of pressure on us. We had to change the investment regulations to make more inspection on Chinese investment in Israel, etc., etc. And some question marks were made regarding some current Chinese ventures in Israel. Okay, we tried to do our best, but again, what happened on October 7th changed everything. It's as if they decided to burn the bridges. With their unilateral denunciation of Israel, Israel was attacked on October 7th. You know, Israel was attacked on October 7th. And this was a terrorist action against mostly civilians. And so when China officially denounces only Israel, that's a very hard blow to Chinese-Israeli relations. Unfortunately. And
So what
it
should
is
Israel
a
do
tragic
now?
development.
So what should Israel do now?
Look, relations with China are important for Israel. But I think what happened in the last 6 months proved that China is not to be entirely trusted in times of emergency. And our allies they are not in China, let's put it this way, and not in Russia. They are in Europe, they are in the United States. These are the countries that helped us with diplomatic support, with weapons, with military support, with intelligence support. China, Russia were doing everything they could just to destabilize Israel and to weaken its position, our position. And I think relations with China are important. We have commercial interests, we have other interests, but we should be very much conscious not to put too many things on the Chinese basket, because it's not so safe for us to do so. And the Chinese must realize if they want to be, they put it, you know, when we were there in October, they said that they wanted to have a new architecture, defense architecture in the Middle East. This was their term, defense architecture in the Middle East. In order to have a new defense architecture in the Middle East with China at its core, that is the obvious thing for them, then China must be in good terms with both sides, not just with Iran, Syria, and Hamas.
Obviously.
But it's not the case. October 7th and what happened next, the war, proved that China has a very strong and blunt unilateral position, which is not on the Israeli side, but entirely on our enemy's side.
You'll be going to China,
Yes.
if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah.
in a few weeks.
Yeah.
So what is your message? And you'll be joined, by the way, by mid-career professionals.
I don't have a
Israel.
message for them. I'm not in an official position to give them messages. These are things that they hear from many people regarding their relations with Israel. And I think that if before October 7th, the US had to put pressure on Israel not to engage too much with China because of all sorts of risks, now the United States doesn't have to put much pressure on Israel for us not to do it, because we understand that there are risks with China and that the Chinese position, as long as it's so unilateral anti-Israeli, it would be difficult for us to engage in a much open and, you know, deep manner with China as we would like to. We respect China. We learn a lot from China. China is a great country with many achievements. But it was their choice to take a very strong anti-Israeli position on the most fragile time for us. We are a small country. We are not like China in the United States. We were attacked, you know, the north is still deserted. Our kibbutzim, our moshavim, you know, this is terrible. And
You
to
have
blame
a home
Israel.
up there. You have a home up in the north.
Yes, yeah, always the alarms and booms going on all the time. And listening to what's going on in China at the time was terrible. And it didn't change. As I told you, they followed this with all sorts of outrageous remarks and comments regarding the Palestinian reaction, and etc., etc. So I think that relations will go on, etc. But it's a big burden. It's a big, יש צל כבד על היחסים. צל כבד.
A heavy shadow has descended upon the relations. I get that. So, what should Israel's next steps be?
Israel should make it clear to China that it would not accept this unilateral, blunt position from a country which is supposed to be friendly. China is supposed to be a friendly nation. We do not have any conflict with China. And the relations for 3 decades were very good, and they were developing, etc., etc., till the point that Netanyahu had this bizarre idea to have China as a counterbalance to the United States, where he proved to be wrong. many other issues as well. But anyway, nowadays, these ideas are gone. But if we want to preserve, and this is
But how do we get the message? How do we fake China?
first of all, we say it. We say the message. And as I told you, Israel took some steps. For instance, signing this petition to the Chinese government, along with 50 other governments, about
Human Rights Committee.
about the human rights violations in the Muslim province of Xinjiang. You know, China has problems of that sort, you know, that's not a new thing.
Yes.
Israel was not the first to criticize China and to blame China for no, we had good relations with them, and they were developing, the relations were going on smoothly. But
So you should be. So
there should be an Israeli reaction, Tommy. There should be an Israeli statement about it. And again, and China must understand that there might be other steps on the pipeline later on. There might be. It's not just, doesn't depend only on Israel. This is a mutual, you know, relationship. And if China continues to put Israel as the sole responsible for the crisis in the Middle East and support our worst enemies, then what would you like us to do? To say it's okay? I don't think it's okay. And I don't think it serves China's interest, and especially not in the Middle East. And anyway, we have our commitment to, the US is committed to Israel, and we are committed to the United States. This is our closest ally, especially now, although there are a lot of disagreements between Netanyahu and Biden, but still on the core, the US is Israel's best and maybe strongest, most reliable ally. And so, yeah, and that puts Israel-Chinese relations in a different position than it used to be. That's it. And if China if China continues to support Hamas, inviting Hamas delegations, supporting Iran, supporting the process against Israel in The Hague, etc., those kinds of actions, then we cannot do many things against China, but we don't have to play along with them. And if the relations with Israel are important for them, and they always say that the relations with Israel are important for them. That's what they're saying. That's their way to present it. If it's important for them, then they should show it. And so far, in the last 6-7 months, they showed the opposite. And yes, I'm, well, personally, it's not a personal issue, but I think Israel is disappointed. I may say so, although I'm not representing the current government, but as far as I hear, Israel is disappointed by the Chinese attitude.
Disappointed, it sounds to me very polite term for that.
No, מה נגיד? אנחנו מדינה קטנה, מה נעשה? נרביץ להם. אבל, yeah, we are disappointed, and so I said,
Look, I have to say,
look, these are not.
the Israeli government responded rather.
Israeli government can do several things. I mentioned the lease for the operation of the container terminal.
Yeah.
This lease might be reconsidered. There might be, if this goes on, there might be new steps regarding the use of dual technologies, the access to cyber technologies, to satellite, to things that can serve military purposes, and other things. You know, Israel cannot do much regarding China. We are a small nation, trapped in war now. But if it's important to China, I hear the Chinese, they're always saying that relations in Israel are important for them. So if these relations are important for them, they should behave accordingly. That's what we're saying.
All right. I have one question to the control. I understand that the Chinese are not back online. No, we have Zhao. All right. So, first of all, I want to thank Mr. Nitzan Horowitz for a rather straightforward and rather rare when it comes to an Israeli, even if he's retired from government at this point. It's rather rare. And I think it testifies to where this relationship really is at this point.
Not in a good position.
Not in a good
Not
position.
in a good position. No. Unfortunately, no. The relations nowadays are sour, are not good. And the Chinese comments, official comments regarding Israel are sometimes, I think, outrageous.
I'm not here.
And
We are in Israel after all, yes.
You know, we had crisis, I mean, times of crisis with China, אם אתה זוכר, סיפור המטוס בזמנו,
The Falkland
היו מקרים.
yes, the Harpy.
There were, it was not always smooth, okay, but still, we didn't have this kind of comments from Beijing in our most vulnerable moment. At least, you know, many countries denounced Israel.
Yeah.
Okay, but they also denounced Hamas. Or first they denounced Hamas because Hamas attacked first. And then they denounced Israeli war, etc., etc. Okay. But China only puts the blame on Israel, entirely on Israel. And this is, we cannot accept it. We cannot accept it. And it's not, it puts Israeli-Chinese relations in a point, in a bad point. Let's put it this way.
Nitzan, I want to thank you for your contribution to this discussion, for being straightforward and right on point. Thank you very much.
Toda, toda.
And I want to already invite the next session to join us. We're doing it a bit 5 minutes earlier. I want to invite Mr. Shashevsky and Professor Adamski to join me. I hope that we have Professor Zhao Hai online and Dr. Meena Roy Singh supposed to be joining us. And Nitzan, toda rabba. Thank you. Yes, we're coming up, moving up. And I just have to open up the program with your permission. It's always useful to. Yes, we're in the right space. Beijing, Moscow, Tehran, a tale of three cities, what it means for the world and for Israel. And again, we have a very diverse but I would say seasoned experts coming together to weigh in on this subject. To my far left, a dear friend, Professor Dima Adamski, a professor of government from the Lula School of Government, Diplomacy and Strategy, that I forget all the title, from the Reichman University. To my left, Mr. Yuval Shashevsky. He is, how I say, his official title is, I just want to read it out so I don't misspoke myself, God forbid. He's the former head of the research division in the Prime Minister's office. All right, that's one way to put it. And joining us from abroad, on the left side of the screen is Dr. Zhao Hai. He is Director of International Political Studies at the National Institute for Global Strategy at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, CAS. Dr. Zhao, good evening in Beijing.
Hi, good evening.
It's good to have you back with us once again and in good shape. And on the right-hand side of the screen, we have Dr. Meena Singh Roy. She is, first of all, a fellow of Signal Group, I have to add. She, until recently, headed the West Asia and Eurasia research group at MPIDSA in Delhi. She now is in a similar position with the Tilottoma Foundation, if I pronounce it correctly, in Delhi, and is a distinguished fellow of Delhi's Middle East Institute. And I think that the discussion we just had with former Minister Nitzan Horowitz put this session in a very clear perspective, at least from an Israeli side. And but before I turn to Dr. Zhao, I want to ask Yuval, to what extent is what we think China's role in the Middle East, it's aligning with Iran, aligning with Iran's proxies, to what extent does that really matter? Does it really affect our national security? Or is it, not so consequential?
Okay, it's work. First of all, thank you for having me, hosting this magnificent conference and this specific session. I would like to answer the question to start with a broader perspective, okay? But to directly to your question is, yes, it's mean a lot for Israel security. And I want to explain why. Because when you're talking about Chinese involvement in the region, in the Middle East, we're talking about, especially nowadays, we're talking about the relationship between China and Iran. And we should look at this partnership or connection in two different dimensions. One is the tactical dimension. There is a partnership of information, of technology, of know-how, which of course it's put Israel in, not in huge risk, but it's better Israel's strategic posture. I think most interesting is the strategic significance of this partnership, and it's the issue of backup Iran. When Israel look at the region and try to tackle Iran, the idea of strategic backup from China, both from Russia, is important and influence how Iran see itself and how Iran ready to act, okay? How many risks they are ready to take when it's come to this conflict. So yes, it's important. Nevertheless, I want to say about the name of the session because it's important to your question. The issue of the Tale of Three Cities, and each one of us, I guess, has his own idea about what kind of relationship. Is it a strategic alliance? No, my impression is not strategic alliance. Strategic alliance based on shared values, based on much deeper ideology. Is it axis of reliance? Nitzan Horowitz uses the term. I don't think it's axis of reliance. Again, axis of reliance, if we have in mind the connection between Iran, Hezbollah, Syria, it's something much deeper. You sit together, you plan together, you put target together. This is not axis of alliance, but a resistance, sorry, axis of resistance. That's not my definition of axis of resistance. Yes, it's strategic partnership based on interest, number one interest is anti-American one, and there are other interests like economy, like security, technology, whatsoever. But this is important to understand because China also have balance role in this triangle. So it's important because we as Israelis, we usually go very fast to try to define something very risky, very problematic. It's put strategic challenge on Israel, yes, but it's not strategic alliance, it's not axis of resistance, it's based on partnership, interest, and in some cases, it's also help. Look at the JCPOA issue, the nuclear issue. China also had a positive balance role. So it's the picture is not mixed, but it involved different aspects.
All right. Thank you for that. I want to turn to Dr. Zhao in Beijing. I don't know if you remember, but when we last talked, it was, I think, a year and a half ago when we held our last conference. And if I recall correctly, we were talking about China's deficit when it came to partners and allies. And I think you said at the time, and perhaps my memory is bad, that you said something along the lines that, you see, well, that also frees us up because we don't have to consider what our partners want or do, and gives us much more flexibility and freedom. So I think, it would be fair to say that a year and a half later, China seems to be catching up and has found strategic partners and is trying to draw a line in the Middle East. Or am I wrong, Dr. Zhao?
Thank you very much for inviting me. Before I answer your question, I've listened into this conference for almost an hour, and it deeply, deeply saddens me of what Israelis are now thinking about China, because there are so many misrepresentation and wrong information about China's position. First of all, China categorically condemned any terrorist attack on civilians, including Hamas. So anybody, previous speakers talking about China is not condemning Hamas is wrong. That's number one. And number two, to say that in this conflict, China is siding with Iran and making, or almost like taking Israel as an enemy is also wrong. China has been friends of Jewish people and Israel state for many years. And of course, we also maintain good relations with Arab states as well as Iran. So I want to make this very clear. And to say that, listening to the previous retired government official, and also I've talked to him before, to say that he wanted to take steps to aim at China's soft part like Taiwan and Xinjiang is also very upsetting and disturbing. That will completely destroy China-Israel relationship. So I don't want to see us going there. So here I want to make the record very clear that China maintained an independence.
Can I interrupt with one question? I just want to interrupt. Were you surprised by Nitzan Horowitz's remarks?
Yes,
Were you taken by surprise?
Yes. Because in China, there's a very much divided opinion about how to respond to October 7th. There's a very strong group here supporting Israel. So to say that China only criticized and one-sidedly sitting on the opposite side of Israel, I think that's ignorant of China's domestic opinion. And also I'm surprised that October 7th is the only beginning point and ending point of the discussion. There's no, I'm sorry, but I have to be blunt. There's no soul searching and self-reflection of Israel's own policy. Only pointing fingers at China. That is also surprising to me because at this point, if you look around the world, who is agreeing with current Israel's policy? I mean, how can you